Today's daf we're going to be learning is Horayot daf Yud. We're going to get started from the Mishnah with a quick review of the Mishnah on daf Tet Amud Bet. So we saw that the Kohen Mashiach, or a king who sins, and then became they were no longer the Kohen Gadol, or no longer the Nasi, they still have to bring their special korban. But if they sinned after they were no longer, then the Nasi brings the regular korban, and the Kohen doesn't bring a korban. The Kohen still brings the unique korban, and the Nasi brings a korban of a regular person. So now the Gemara is just going to ask a side question about the formulation of the Mishnah. If already you say about the Kohen Mashiach that once he's no longer a Kohen Gadol, and then he sins, he brings a par, of course, like you don't even need to say the case then of if he sinned when he was the Kohen Gadol and is no longer. Obviously, if he sinned after he's no longer the Kohen Gadol, he has to bring. Of course, he still has to bring the bull if he sinned when he was the Kohen Gadol, even though now he isn't anymore. So the answer the Gemara gives is, well, it's really because of the Nasi case. Mishum de Katana Gebe Nasi. The whole reason they bring it about the first case and then the second case is really because they want to get to the Nasi case to distinguish between the Kohen Gadol and the Nasi. We want to teach you that the Nasi turns back into a regular person when he's no longer a Nasi. And therefore, and that's why they bring the case of the Mashiach. They want to tell you when he sins and then is no longer, he brings the bull. That's really only because of the case of you want to get to the differentiation between them at the end of the mission. Now we want to know, where do we get this from, that the Kohen Gadol, once he's no longer Kohen Gadol, he still has to bring, even if he sins after, still has to bring the unique bull sacrifice, sin offering. Ditanu Rabbanan. We're going to bring a braita. Now, this is in the section where the Kohen brings his korban. And different from all the other people who bring korbanot, usually it just says they sinned, right? There's the Paralim Dever Shel Tzibor, there's the Nasi, all of them it says they sin and then they bring the korban. This one says, for the Kohen Gadol, Ikriv on his sin. Now obviously we know he sinned, we know that's why he's bringing a korban. You don't need to say on his sin. So why does it say that? It teaches you that he brings his sin offering even if this extra al chatato is trying to say there's in addition, there's other cases where a Nasi will bring because of a sin, and that's when he brings a sin, even if he's not a Kohen Gadol anymore. It's just to include an additional case. So now the Gemara says, without this, actually, you would have come to an opposite conclusion. That's why do we need the drasha? Because of this following kavachomer we could have made. Now, we're going to have a series of kavachomers, and they're built on differences based on the Nasi and the Kohen Gadol. One of the big differences is something we learned about in the previous daf, which is, and also on Daf Zayin, which is that a Nasi brings a chatat for just accidentally eating chelev, for example. Whereas a Kohen Gadol does not bring a chatat in that case. The Kohen Gadol brings a chatat only in the case where the Kohen Gadol taught something wrong and then did according to the mistaken action, the mistaken ruling. So that means that the premise of this whole thing is that the Nasi has more cases where they bring a korban chatat, and the Kohen Gadol is limited because he only brings it if there was a mistaken teaching and then he did it. As opposed to the Nasi who just brings in any kind of case of shgaga. So therefore, it would be logical. The Nasi brings his korban even if he just makes a mistake in his action, and yet but yet, as we saw in the Mishnah, and we're going to see where we get this from a drasha in another 2 minutes, he doesn't bring a korban if he's no longer the Nasi. So Mashiach, since the Kohen Mashiach already brings in less cases, because he doesn't bring on Shigat Maseh, it has to have Helem Davar, where he was incorrect about a ruling, and then did an action, Lo Kol Shekain, right? All the more so, if the Kohen Gadol is already limited in when he brings the par, then wouldn't we just limit it even more and say he shouldn't bring once he's no longer Kohen Gadol? Talmud Lomar, that's what we need the Shoshat, B'Kriv al Chatato, Melamed Shemevi al Chatato Misha'ava. So because it says B'Kriv al Chatato, from there we learn it's Chatato right? That it includes an additional case. So without the drasha, you would have come to the opposite conclusion. So now they say, well, if we already come to the conclusion that the Kohen Gadol, who on the one hand is limited somehow when they bring the par, and yet brings it in this case, well, then we can bring a Kal V'chomer and learn to the Nasi. So why don't we then say, which we don't say, but why don't we suggest that this case we said about the Kohen Gadol, that he brings even when he's no longer a Kohen Gadol, maybe the Nasi also should bring even when he's not a Nasi anymore, from the following Kal V'chomer, the exact logic we just set up a minute ago. The Mashiach, the Kohen Gadol, doesn't bring if he just makes a mistake and eats chaylev by accident. And yet, he brings a sin offering even if he's no longer the Kohen Gadol. So a Nasi So a Nasi who brings for every mistaken action, right? More cases where the Nasi brings, wouldn't you think that the Nasi would also bring in that case? Talmud Lomar, that's why the pasuk says, and this is a pasuk we're going to darshan a lot of times today, so pay attention. Asher Nasi Achata. Kshu Nasi in, Kshu Hedyot Lo. Right, when it introduces the whole section about the Nasi and the special sacrifice he has to bring, it says, and when a king sins. So now they say, king sins, he has to be a king when he sins. If he's not a king when he sins, he doesn't. Okay, and that's what they darshan from that pasuk. New Mishnah. Well, we're going to come back to this Asher Nasi Achata as I mentioned. Chat'u ad shelo nitmanu v'achar kach nitmanu. What if they sinned and they hadn't yet been appointed? They weren't yet the Kohen Gadol or the king, and then they were appointed, and they still haven't brought their korban yet. What korban did they bring? They're just like regular people, meaning they bring the regular korbanot because they sinned when they were an individual, not when they were in this prominent position, even though right now they're in the prominent position. Rabbi Shimon disagrees, and Rashi points out he also disagrees about the previous Mishnah because he has this whole unique approach, which is im noda lehem ad shelo nitmanu. It's not important the time they sinned. What's important is the knowledge and the sinning and knowing. When you sin by accident, you don't know you did anything wrong. There has to be that moment when you find out. So both those, according to Rabbi Shimon, have to happen. Those are a unit. Okay, we're going to say like this. Im noda lehem ad shelo nitmanu. If they did it before, they sinned. But then they became king, or Kohen Gadol. Then they find out. Chayavim. Okay, Im noda lehem ad shelo nitmanu. If they found out before they were appointed to the job, then chayavim. Then they'll be obligated, because both the sin and the knowledge happened when they were an individual. Umishin nitmanu. But once they got appointed, and then they find out they sinned before, ptulim, they're actually completely exempt. Because you can't rule that case not as an individual and not as a king, because those two things have to happen when you're in the same status. And if they don't, you're actually exempt. Okay? And without going into the details, but you can look back at the previous mission and figure out how this disagrees. It's a really long daf, so we're going to leave that aside. Ezehu Nasi. What is a Nasi? Now, this we talked about already. It's a melech. It's a king. How do we know? Shenema, Mikom Mitzvat Hashem Elokav, and we're going to darshan this the same way we darshaned it previously, but to teach us something different. Before we darshan this to say, he doesn't have, right, exact words we're going to see now. She'ein al gabav el Hashem Elokav. The only one above him is God. Now we're using it to say, oh, that must be the king. There's no one else like that. And before we use it to say, that means they can never become poor, because they're never dependent on anyone else. It's the same idea, though. I mean, different, but the same drasha. Minahanemile. Okay, comes the Gemara and says, where do we get this from? That what? That if the king or the Kohen Gadol sinned before they were appointed and then they become appointed, they're like Hedyotot, regular people. Titanu Rabbanan. Im a Kohen HaMashiach yachta la'ashmat. Really, the focus is not on the word la'ashmat, but im a Kohen HaMashiach yachta. Prat l'kodmot, this comes to exclude. He has to be the Kohen when he sins, because the Kohen HaMashiach yachta. If he wasn't a Kohen HaMashiach when he sinned, then he's not obligated. Right? Shalom. Now, the Gemara says, this time we're going to bring a Kal V'chomer and say, couldn't you have actually learned it from the Kal V'chomer? And the last time we brought the Kal V'chomer, we said the Kal V'chomer might lead you to say the opposite, and that's why we need the drasha. Here they're saying, why do you even need a drasha? You can learn it from a Kal V'chomer. And again, we're going to go to very similar kind of Kal V'chomers. Again, remember, the Nasi is not so limited because he brings even for just a mistake, by just doing an action wrong, like eating chaylev, and yet, ein mevi ala kodmot, and the king, which we're going to see later where they get it from, doesn't bring if they weren't the king at the time they sinned. So, and they're going to actually learn it from Asher Nasiachta. When they're a Nasi, they sin not if they weren't the Nasi when they sinned. So Mashiach she'em mevi elal helem davar. If the Kohen Gadol already is more limited because he only brings if there's helem davar, there was a mistaken ruling of the king and of the Kohen Gadol or the court, right? And then he does the shigat maaseh. Ein no din shelo yavi ala kodmot. So all the more so, right? He shouldn't bring if he's already limited and doesn't bring in that case. Obviously, he wouldn't bring in this case where he wasn't even the Kohen Gadol yet. So why do you need a drasha for that? You could just learn it from a Kaf HaChomer, which the Gemara says no, that's not a good Kaf HaChomer. Lo. Im amarta b'nasi shekene mevi chatat mishaval chatato mishaval. Tomar, but now we're going to go back to our previous halacha in the beginning of the daf. The nasi doesn't bring a chatat when he's not a nasi anymore. But Tomar b'mashiach, and that's all along, right? We're trying to say, well, the nasi is in more cases. So if the nasi is not in this case of before he became king, then the Kohen Gadol wouldn't either. But now they say, well, the Kohen Gadol is in more cases than the nasi, because the Kohen Gadol brings maybe chatatot mishavar even when he's no longer in his position. He still brings the chatat, right, the unique par offering. So maybe chatatot mishavar, maybe you'll say that just like the Kohen Gadol brings when he's no longer the Kohen Gadol, maybe he brings if he's the Kohen Gadol but sinned previously. Talmud Lomar, that's why you need the drasha, because the Kaf HaChomer can be knocked out. HaMashiach yechta. Chatak shu Mashiach mevi kshu edyot eino mevi, right? Only when he sins when he's the Mashiach, not if he's not. V'tanya nami kabei nasi kehagavna. And now we're going to say there's also a right about the nasi, just like we just did, just like the first video we did. This is how it goes. There's a drasha for the Kohen, but you could have said Kaf HaChomer. That's why you need the drasha. And then they said the same thing. Oh, you could have said Kaf HaChomer for the nasi, the other, and again you learn it from drasha. So same thing we're going to do here by Nasi, Ki Agavna. Asher Nasiach Ta Pra L'Kodmot. Again, we have the same drasha. Asher, right, that was Asher Kohen Yachta, and now Asher Mashiach Yachta, and now it's actually not Asher, it's Ki, right, Mashiach Yachta, and now we have Nasiach Ta. Pra L'Kodmot. That means not if he wasn't the Nasi when he sinned. She'achov Alo Dinu. Now again, they're going to say, you might have thought you could have derived it from a Kaf HaChomer. If the Kohen Gadol brings when he's no longer the Kohen Gadol, and yet doesn't bring if he wasn't yet the Kohen Gadol when he sinned, so Nasi Shein, maybe if the Nasi doesn't bring at the end, right, when they're no longer a Nasi, all the more so, of course then logic would state he wouldn't bring on if he sinned before he was the Nasi. They say, no, you can knock out that Kaf HaChomer, and again, that's why you need the drasha to teach you that, again, neither the Kohen nor the Nasi bring a korban if they weren't the Kohen or Nasi when they sinned. But here we're going to knock out the Kaf HaChomer, because again, this is all a play on the one hand, the Kohen and Mashiach has more cases because they'll bring even when they're no longer a Kohen Gadol, and the Mashiach and the Nasi has more cases because they bring on Shigat Maaseh, right, when they just make a mistake in action, like eating Chalev, where the Mashiach wouldn't bring there, and that's what they're going to say now. Ma the Mashiach, right? So you tried to say the Mashiach goes in more cases, and yet is limited to this. So the Nasi, which is limited in cases, should be limited to that also. But say the reverse. Ma the Mashiach is also limited. Maybe b'shigat maaseh, but tomar b'nasi, maybe b'shigat maaseh. And therefore, the Nasi case, he brings in many more cases. So maybe he would also bring if he sinned and then became the king. Right? Maybe you would think then maybe he does bring before if he became the Nasi after he sinned. Talmud Lomar, that's why it says Asher Nasiachta Shechatav Areu Nasi V'lo Shechatav Odeu Hedyon. Nasiachta, right? Again, both those psukim, the Kohen the Mashiach Yachta, the Nasiachta, only when they sin when they're a Nasi, when they're a Kohen Gadol. Now I told you we're going to get into all these drashot on Asher Nasiachta, other drashot about these words. Tanu Rabbanan. So they're going to bring a braita. We're going to go through a lot of braitot here. Asher Nasiachta. Now the wording of this is strange. Im a Kohen Mashiach Yachta is the pasuk by the Kohen. If a Kohen Mashiach sins, okay, that's pretty obvious. If the Kohen Gadol sins, that's exactly what it's telling you, and then this is what you're supposed to do. But with the Nasi it says Asher Yasi Nechta. Now to translate this literally, it means when a king sins. When sounds like it's definitely going to happen. which means Yachol Gzera. The Gemara is going to say, what? Is this like God decreeing the king will make a mistake? And then that's what they have to bring when that happens. So they say, Talmud Lomar, no. That's why the Pasuk says, Im HaKohen HaMashiach Yachta, Malalan L'Chish Yachta, Avkan L'Chish Yachta. So they make this parallel. Since it says if in the case of the Kohen HaMashiach, it must be also if in the case of the Nasi, and it's only if it happens. It's not telling you this will happen. So now the Gemara is going to go back and analyze the Braita. Amar Mar, Yachol Gzera. Gzera mehechatite. Wait a minute. Why? Where would we get this idea that God decreed that the king is going to sin? Amrei. They said, what do you mean? Why are you so surprised by that? Yeah, we have psukim like that in the Torah that decree that bad things, people will do mistakes or bad things will happen. Where do we see it? When it talks about leprosy of the house, it says, and I will bring leprosy on your houses. Rabbi Yehuda reads that pasuk as, this is God declaring, this will happen. I will punish you with leprosy of the house. Not saying, if in the case where this happens, this is what you do. But no, this will happen. And therefore, we have a model. We're going to come back to this in one more minute. We're just going to read Rabbi Shimon, which is going to get us off on a tangent. But this isn't really related to our issue right now. Rabbi Shimon reads that pasuk as, Prat l'nigei onsim. Natati negat sarat bebeit eretz achuzatchem means, when is it leprosy? When God brings it. Not when it comes by accident, like you were sick and you got leprosy or something. So now the Gemara, but going back to our topic, Lav Amar Rabbi Yehuda b'socha, Hanani em gzerahi, hilkach tiv'im. So now they say, just like there, Rabbi Yehuda says, it's God saying this is going to happen. Also here by us, we could say it was God saying it's going to happen, or we might have thought Asher Nesiachta was a decree. Therefore, it says im by the Kohen to teach you. It's also im by the Nasi, and it's not a decree from God. Okay. Now we just have to go back and understand Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon, wait a minute. If I get leprosy because I'm sick, what? That's not leprosy? Right? It's beyond my control. What does that mean? That's not leprosy? What do you mean? Of course it's leprosy, and we're going to see so from a Braita. Again, the Braita is going to get us off on some other issue, but in that Braita you're going to see that leprosy can be even by a disease or something, by accident. Tanya, Adam ki yehiyeh. Okay, this is when a person has a leprous mark. Min hadibor va'elach. So why does it say ki yehiyeh? They want to teach you. Leprosy has a whole series of things you're supposed to do. You're supposed to watch it. Sometimes you have to be quarantined for a certain amount of time. All that, if you get the Torah, let's say in the middle of having leprosy, it all starts from the beginning, from the time the Torah was given. We don't look back at what your leprosy was before, how many days you had it, all that. We ignore what happened before. Valodinu. Now, they say, why do we need a pasuk to teach you that? A drasha. You could just learn it from Kavachomer. This is a running theme in our daf today. What's the Kavachomer? Timei bezav v'timei b'negaim. Or here it's not exactly Kavachomer, it's just a logical argument, which is there's tumat zav, okay, which is a discharge by a man, and there's tumat negaim, so which is leprosy. Ma zav min adibor ve'elach. Now, when it comes to this discharge from a man, it could right, you have to have a series of times you have this discharge, and only then do you bring a sacrifice, and you have to count and all that. So again, if Matan Torah happens in the middle and you get the commandments in the middle, we ignore whatever happened before. We start from here. It's like starting blank slate. So just like there's Tuman Zav, there's Tuman Negaim. Just like the Zav is Min Adibor, also Tzarat. So why do you need a drasha to tell us that? To which they answer, lo. No, we don't have that drasha. Why? And here comes why we brought this. But Zav, if you have this discharge and it's from you were sick, that's not a discharge that we're talking about. That's not Zav. Nigaim, though, could be. We count it as Sarad if you're sick or something happened beyond your circumstances. Beyond your control. Circumstances beyond your control. So that's why we can't learn this Zerusha, this comparison. Talmud Lomar Adam ki yeh. That's why you need the drasha. Adam ki yeh min adibor ve'elach. Okay, that was all an aside. Why did we bring this? Just to say, how could Rabbi Shimon say prat lenegei onsim when a nega that comes from ones, circumstance beyond your control, is leprosy? So Rav and Rav Papa Yishuv explain possible options for how to understand what Rabbi Shimon meant. It wasn't what he meant, what we thought he meant. Rav Amar Prat L'Negei Ruchot, if you get a leprous mark caused by an evil spirit, Rav Papa Amar Prat L'Negei Kshafim, if it happened from sorcery. Okay, this is this understanding, okay, and you could take, like, if you go back to the Egyptians in the time of when they were in Egypt, and remember that Moshe was trying to show his simanim, and the Egyptian magicians were showing their simanim, the Khartoumi. So there was this idea that other people could bring things through sorcery, some other method, like these evil spirits. That's not from God, and that's not what leprosy is in the Torah. Leprosy in the Torah is something from God. Now, disease, or having it beyond your control, could be from God. Okay? So that we're going to call leprosy, but not if it came from something other than God. Okay? How you know and how evil spirits and sorcery work, we don't really understand so well. Or at least I don't claim to understand. Okay, Tanu Rabbanan, another drasha on Asher Nasiachta. Asher Nasiachta, Prat Lechole. Not if the Nasi is sick. So now the Gemara is going to ask, what do you mean? What, the king has the flu? What, they're not still the king? What, he's not a king anymore? Amarav, right, just because he's sick, he's pushed off from being king. Amarav Avdimi Barhama, Prat L'Nasisha Nitztara. No, we're talking about a Nasi who became leprous, and because of that had to step down from being king. How do we know there's such a thing? Shenemar V'Yinagash Shem Tamelech. This happened to one of the kings. His name was Azariah, also known as Uziyahu. He was a leper until the day he died. And he sat in the Beit HaChofshit, and Yotam became king instead of him. He was the son of the king. He became king. These are the kings in the Judean kingdom. So now the Gemara is going to go off on a tangent. From this, we're going to get off a total tangent. When it says he stayed in the house of the free house, right, the independent house. From there you learn that before that, he wasn't chofshi, he was an eved. When he was king, he was a slave. It's very interesting. We talked before, no one else is above him. But in the sense, what they're saying is the king works for the people. The king's actually enslaved to the people. It's a labor of someone is head of country, right? They're enslaved to the people to a certain extent. And saying they work for the people. It's kind of to balance, it's not really like there's no one above them other than God, because they have to speak to the people and they have to be there for the people. Now we're going to talk about that issue. And we're going to prove it from this story. So the beginning of the story is irrelevant, although super interesting. Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yeshua were on a boat. Bahadi did Rabban Gamliel have a pita. He had some bread with him. Bahadi Rabbi Yeshua have a pita v'sulta. Rabbi Yeshua brought bread also, and flour, fine flour. Shlim pite to Rabban Gamliel. Now, what happens? Okay, this is like you go on a plane and you assume it's going to be X amount of hours, flight's delayed, you're stuck, you get stuck in the airport, you have no food, right? So you always bring some food with you just to make sure. So Rabbi Yeshua brought extra food, not just for the journey, but for beyond. So when Rabban Gamliel's bread was finished, Samach Asulte to Rabbi Yeshua. He relied on the flour that Rabbi Yeshua brought. Amarle said to Rabbi Yeshua, how were you so smart to figure out there was going to be a delay and you brought your fine flour? Amarle, he says, I know there's this star, once every 70 years it appears, and it messes up the sailors. And I said, what if that happens exactly when we're on the boat? You might call that excessive worrying. But actually, Rabban Gamliel is very impressed with this. Amarle, so what's his reaction? He says, you're so smart, and yet you're going on boats to make money? Like, you should be able to make money in your own hometown. You shouldn't have to travel for work. That's like a punishment almost. Like, you should be able to make money where you live. You shouldn't have to rely on travel, boat travel. Amarle, his answer is even stranger. He says, if you're surprised by how smart I am, I'll tell you, there's two really, really smart people. And if you think like I have trouble making a living, look at these two people, Rabbi Elazar Chisma and Rabbi Yochanan ben Gudgeda. They could tell you how many drops there are in the sea. They're super smart, right? Which is hard to imagine. Ve'ein lahem, right? Obviously, it's exaggerated. They don't have bread to eat and no clothes to wear. They are so poor. So Rabban Gamliel said, I'm going to take care of those people. Now, whether it means I'm going to put them, now what it means really is I'm going to put them at the head of, I'm going to put them up as Rosh Yeshiva. Now, did he do this because they were so poor and he wanted to help them? And they were smart and poor, and let's do that to help them? Or was he just doing it because he said, wow, they must be so smart, let me put them as heads of the yeshiva? Not necessarily clear they were going to make money doing this. In any case, Kisha'ala, when he was finished, got off the boat, that's what means Kisha'ala, when he got back onto the land, Shalach lehem v'lo ba'u. He sent to them to bring them, make them, heads of the yeshiva, and they wouldn't come. Chazar v'shalachu ba'u. We sent them another time, and then they came. Amar lehem, what, you think I'm doing this just for kavod, for your respect? And that's what you think this job is for? Turning out I'm a bet. No, I'm giving you a job. You're going to be indentured to the people. Shne'amal, and then he quotes him a pasuk. This is by Rechavam when he takes over. What causes the whole split with Yeravam in the end? It's that he listens to his advisors and he doesn't listen to the elders. And the elders told him, the advisor said, you should make it hard for the people, give higher taxes than your father and make the people work harder. And the elders said to him, if you work for the people, they will in the end respect you and work for you. And it's a fascinating, right? It makes a lot of sense in terms of leadership, and we're going to see some more stuff about leadership coming up, which is, right, a leader needs to view him or herself as working for the people, right? Not for their own self-interest, not for kavod, not for high, I want to be position of superiority, but actually work for the people and view themselves as if they're working for the people and not that they're high above everybody else. Okay, next message about leadership, and also it's going to come from this pasuk Asher Nasiachta. Tanu Rabbanan Asher Nasiachta. Now again, this Asher was bothering us before. It sounds like God is decreeing something bad is going to happen. The king is going to make a mistake. This actually flips it and says the word Asher, actually, now in the end we said it's not the case, right? But they suggested. Now they're going to say Asher comes from the word also Ashrei. Ashrei is happy is. So, Asher Nasiachta, Amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Ashrei Hador Shanasi Shalom Mevi Korban Al Shigato. Blessed is the generation where the Nasi brings a korban on his mistakes. Right? Nasi Shalom Mevi Korban Tzarich Halomar Ma'u Hidyot. What better example for a leader to say, I made a mistake? If they say, I made a mistake, the people will also say, we made mistakes, right? They're a leader. They have to be a personal example. Be'imal shigato mevi korban, tzarich talomar ma'uz don't know. And if he's going to bring a korban on shkaga, all the more so, right, by doing something unwitting, all the more so will do it on something intentional. That is a good thing. Matkif la rava b'rei derava elameata. Wait, are you going to say that wherever it says ashrei, asher it means is good? Ve'et asher chata min hakodesh yishalem. This is if somebody makes a sins and mi'ila misuses consecrated property, they have to pay. What? That's a good thing? That's not a good thing. It will be Yeravam ben Nevat. Going back to the Rechavam story, Yeravam ben Nevat says Asher chatav Asher chti. He sinned and he caused others to sin. He uses the word Asher. What? That was a good thing. Hachinami Ashrei Adorhu. What? His generation was blessed because he sinned and caused them all to sin. To which they answer Shanehacha Deshane Krabadiburei. Now here it's because instead of saying Im hanasiachta, like a tip of the coin, it used a different word, then you can darshan it. But it doesn't mean you can darshan it everywhere it comes. Now, if we're already on the word asher, we're going to bring another pasuk, okay, which I'm going to read you the whole pasuk because they don't tell you the whole pasuk, but it's in Kohelet, chapter 8, verse 14. Yesh hevel asher nasa la'aretz. Okay, there's a I'm going to read you in the English here. Here's a frustration that occurs in the world. Asher yesh tzadikim asher migia lehem. There are sometimes a tzadik, a righteous man. They get not rewarded really like things happen to them like what happened to bad people. This is the classic tzaddik v'ra lo rasha v'tovlo. And yesh risha'im, there are risha'im shemigeh lehem k'maseh tzadikim. Right, but the tzadikim should be getting the risha'im get. Amarti sh'legam zehevel. Right, that's all like frustration they say in the Hebrew here, in the English here, but there's a word that it means it's something bad. But now they're going to darshan this asher as ashrei, and now we're going to have to figure out what they mean. So darshan Rav Nachman Rav Chisda mai dachtiv yesh hevel asher nasa la'aretz. What's this pasuk talking about? Ashreihem latzadikim shemigia elehem k'maaser risha'im shel olam haba ba'olam hazeh. Okay, this is a very complicated phrase. The risha'im, if you remember, there's this concept we see many times in Shas. The risha'im in this world get rewarded, and the risha'im in the world to come will get their punishment. And the tzadikim. So now they're going to say, good is for a tzaddik who get, now why do the Rishayim get good in this world? One of the explanations for Tzaddik, for Rasha v'Tovlo, because any sachar they get is going to be given to them in this world. There's going to be nothing left in the world to come. And like in the reverse, if the Tzaddikim suffer in this world, then they'll get all their punishment in this world, and they'll have all the rewards in the world to come. So, well, happy is the Tzaddik who gets, now we're going to read it, what the Rishayim are supposed to get in Olam Haba, which is punishment, comes to the Tzaddik in this world. That's a good thing. And Oilahem, because then, again, all their punishments will happen in this world, and they'll be able to get rewards in the next world. Oilahem l'Rishayim, and woe is to the wicked people. They're going to get all the good stuff in this world. The ones that the king get in the next world, they're going to get in this world, and that's bad for them because then they won't get Olam Haba. But Rava doesn't like this. I'm a Rava. Says what? If you're a tzaddik, you're supposed to be happy that you got punished in this world. And what if you didn't get punished? What? And let's say you didn't get punished in this world, and you didn't get punished in the next world. What? Shouldn't be happy about that, right? If they get all the rewards in both worlds, what is that a bad thing for them? Should they hate that? It would be bad for them. No. So that doesn't make any sense. So Rava explains this pasuk differently. I'm a Rava. Ashreihem l'tzadikim, happy are the tzadikim, shemegeh aleihem k'maaser v'sha'im shalom hazeh ba'olam hazeh. If they get what the Rishayim get in this world, right? Often you see these bad people that are wealthy. If the good people get that wealth that the wicked people often get in this world, they get it in this world. Wow, how happy they'll be. They'll also get reward in this world and also get reward in the next world. And oilehem l'Rishayim, and woe is to the bad people. Shemegeh aleihem k'maaser tzadikim shalom hazeh ba'olam hazeh. They also get punished in this world. Wow, woe is to them because they're getting punished in this world and punished in the next world. So two different ways of understanding that pasuk, which is also two different approaches, right? You're supposed to love Yisurim or not necessarily. Rav Papa Rav Huna Bereid Rav Yeshua Ata l'Kamei Rava. So Rav Papa Rav Huna Bereid Rav Yeshua come before Rava. Amar Lu, he says to them, Ukim to Masechta Plan and Masechta Plan. Do you really know this Masechet and that Masechet? Like, have you learned them really well? Amar Le'in. They said yes. It Ritu Porta. Have you gotten somewhat wealthy? Amar Le'in. They said yes. Dezabnin Katina Da'ara. We bought ourselves a small piece of land. Kari Alai, we said about them, and now you know why they brought this. Ashreihem l'tzadikim shemegeh aleihem k'maaser v'she'im sheba'olam hazeh ba'olam hazeh. So happy are the tzadikim like you guys that also got wealth in this world and also will get a share in the world to come. Right? You got what's coming to the Rishayim in this world, which is the rewards. You got them in this world as well. If we're talking right about tzadikim, Rishayim, we're continuing along these lines. This pasuk says the ways of God are straight. The righteous people will walk in them and go on the straight path, and the wicked people will fall on the path. So the question is, how could you have two people walking on the same path and one stumbles and one goes straight? Right? Either it's a difficult thing that stumbles everybody, or it's plain and simple and everybody goes straight. So we're going to have 3 attempts to understanding this. Only in the 3rd time we'll be successful. We're going to bring a parable, like a comparison. Mashal l'shnei b'nei adam shetzalu pischehem. Okay, here's a mashal. 2 people who roasted their Pesach. Echad achlo l'shum mitzvah. One ate it for the sake of the mitzvah, to eat the meat of the korban Pesach. Ve'echad achlo l'shum achila gasam. One just wanted to eat a lot of food, so they like steak, so they ate it. The one who ate it for the purpose of the mitzvah, that's tzaddik, and he went in the way. He was a sinner who, stumbled on it. Amar Rish Lakish said, what are you talking about? Rasha Karilei? That's not a Rasha. He ate the korban Pesach because he liked steak, but he didn't do anything bad. He did a mitzvah, right? Maybe he didn't do it in the best way. Pesach milo ka'achil, but didn't he eat the korban Pesach? Okay, he gives a different explanation. Rish Lakish. Mashal l'shnei b'nei adam. 2 people in the same scenario. They each have their wife and their sister in their house. I'm assuming it's dark at night and they don't realize who's in their bed with them. It's a little strange for us to imagine this. So one ended up sleeping with his wife and the other slept with his sister. They're in the exact same scenario, but one ended up sleeping with his sister and one with his wife. Okay, the Gemara is now going to reject this as well and say, what are you talking about, midami? These are not similar. Right? We're talking about a case where The same path. This is two different things. One slept with the wife, one slept with the sister. That's two different actions completely. We need that they both went in the same path, did the same thing, but for one it was good, for one it was bad. So for this, they come up with Lot and his daughters. And this is the story, right, where Lot's daughters getting drunk and they sleep with him because they're worried after stone the world will be destroyed. And they give birth to children, right, Ammon and Moab. So Mashal Lot Ushtei Benotav. Hein nitkavnu l'shem mitzvah. They had good intents, right? They wanted to fill the world with people. Tzadikim yechubam, right? But hushen nitkaven l'shem avera uposhlim yekashlu bam. But he was doing it for the sake of a sin, and that's why. So here you have the exact same action. It was the same intercourse between those two people, but right between Lot and his two daughters. But they did it for the right intents because they said there's no one left for us to marry, right? And he did it for the wrong intents. So now the question is, how do you know why he did it? Maybe he was also intending. So now we're going to quote a pasuk, which comes up earlier before this story in Bereshit Yud Gimel, and it basically we're going to see that Lot is just a bad guy because all the verbs or the actions, words in this pasuk reference other people who did bad things. Vayisa Lot. What is this a reference to? Right? He looked up. V'vatisa eshet adonav et einav. That's Eshet Potiphar who looked at Yosef to seduce him. Et einav, he lifts up his eyes. Vayomer Shimshon. By the way, this is when he splits with Avraham. Okay, when they have fights with his shepherds, and we're going to get back to that in a minute. Shimshon says, "Otak kachli ki yashra be'enai." Right, he goes after Delilah, who ultimately brings his downfall, and it was with his eyes that he sinned. And also Lot. Vayal, and then he sees. Who else sees and does something bad? Vayarot Shechem ben Chamor, when Shechem rapes Dinah. Et kol kikar Yarden. He looks at the kikar Yarden. This is a reference to a pasuk in Proverbs. Ki ba'ad isha zona ad kikar lechem. So the people are basically going to prostitutes and leaving themselves with barely even bread. Ki chula mashkeh. This is when he's looking at the land. This is when he decides I'm going to split from Avram. Because it's all fertile, it's all well-watered land. What's this a reference to? A pasuk in Hosea. I will go after my mistress, my beloved, who's not my wife. Right? The people who give me what I need. Anyway, the point is, right, that's a betrayer. Okay, so Lot was a bad person. But wait, really you can't do this. They raped him. He was sleeping. They engaged in relations with him. When the older one slept with him, it says, so they say, why was there a vav on the bikuma? Why was there a dot on the vav of bikuma? Okay, there's a dot there in the text, in the Torah. It's that he didn't know she was sleeping, but he did when she slept with him, but he did know when she was getting up. My havalela me'abad. My dahava. I don't get it. Okay, so he knew she was getting up from having sexual relations with him, but at that point it was too late. It was done. So how could you be blaming him? Nafkamina delapanya achrina lo yibayle l'mishteh. He shouldn't have drunk the next night and had the same situation happen. He should have learned from his mistake and not done it with the second daughter. Okay, Darish Rabbah. Now we're now going to have some psukim. The first one Rabbah is going to darish, and the next one Rava, or maybe Rabbi Yitzchak. Psukim that we're going to connect with Lot and when he splits off from Avraham. These are both psukim we're going to quote from Proverbs, from Mishlei. So Ach Nifsha is a brother who betrayed from a strong place. Umidyanim, which is contention. Kibriach Harmon, like the bars of a castle, like a bolt of the castle. Ach Nifsha Mikiryat Oz. So what is this? This is Lot, Sheperesh Avraham. He's the brother, right? They were related, and he broke from the stronghold. That was Avraham. Umidyanim Kibriach Harmon. He brought contention. He til midyanim bein Yisrael Amon. Right? A bolt is something that prevents people from connecting with each other. So he put up this contentious wall between Yisrael and Ammon. What does that mean? Shneimar lo yavo Ammonim Moavi b'kal Hashem, because they're not allowed to intermarry with us. Darish Rav Vitema Rabbi Yitzchak. So basically, what we're saying is he separated, and that caused a forever separation and inner fighting. Darish Rav Vitema Rabbi Yitzchak. My dechtiv l'ta'avai vakesh nifrad. if you want to separate from someone for your own personal gain, and out of desire, which is for your own sake, b'chotu shia yitgala. He snarls against all sound wisdom. So l'tava yivakesh nifrad zilot shenifra me'Avraham. He did it for his own self-interest. B'chotu shia yitgala shenitgala klono b'batei knesset u'b'batei midrashot. His humiliation will be announced everywhere in all the shuls and b'batei midrashot. Why? Because it says in the Mishnah, Ammoni and Moavi asurin isur olam. The Ammoni and the Moavi are forbidden to come in. People always talk about it, so that's to the humiliation of Lot, because these were his descendants. Va'amar Ula. Now we're going to see, just like we saw that two people could do the same thing, but it's viewed very differently. Tamar zinta v'zimri zina. There's Tamar who slept with, she made herself into a prostitute to sleep with Yehuda, and she did it to continue her family. She knew it was the right thing. And Zimri zina, right, that was a terrible thing, and then she caused this plague of 24,000 Jews to die. Tamar zinta yatzu mimar malachim u'neviim, right? Kings and prophets came from her, like David HaMelech. Zimri zina naflu kama revavot mi Yisrael. Okay, and then, right, tens of thousands of the Jewish people were killed. Am Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak gdola vera lishma mi mitzvah shelo lishma. Now Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says in this way, right, in a sense, Tamar sinned, but it was an avirah for the right purpose. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says a sin for the right purpose is actually better than a mitzvah shelo lishma, than doing a mitzvah for the wrong reasons, or not for the right reasons. Where do we get this? Shenemar tivorach minashim Yael, and we're going to get into Yael now. Eshet chever akenim minashim ba'ol tivorach. Right? This is from Shirat Torah and Sefer Shoftim. When Yael kills Sisera, the head of the army, she also gets him drunk, goes to sleep, and she kills him. So, but she has sexual relations with him. That's what we're going to darshan in the pasuk very soon. So anyway, she did Navera Lishma to save the Jewish people. And who are the Nashim Ba'ohel? She's Tivorach more than the Nashim in the tents. Who's that? Sarah Rivka B'chel V'le'ah. Now what did they do? They had to do a mitzvah shelo lishma. What was their mitzvah shelo lishma? So they say that perhaps just having relations with their husbands for their own pleasure was doing a mitzvah, but not lishma. Okay, some people say giving them their concubines was really in their own self-interest, and that was maybe the mitzvah shelo lishma. Okay, but now the Gemara is going to say, what do you mean? How can an avirah lishma be greater than a mitzvah shelo lishma? Ini v'hamar Rav Yehuda amar Rav l'olam yasek adam Torah v'mitzvot v'ilo shelo lishma. We talk shelo lishma ba lishma. Very famous line. You should always do Torah and mitzvot. Okay, it's said in the name of Rav, even if it's not for the right reasons. Because if you start with the wrong reasons, you'll come to do it for the right reasons. So they changed what we said before. Ema ki mitzvah shelo lishma. Ki mitzvah shelo lishma. It means an avirah lishma is like, not it's greater than. An avirah mitzvah shelo lishma, it's equal to. Okay, these are both not as good as a mitzvah lishma, but they're both equal in status. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, back to Yael. Sheva bi'ilo ba'alo tarasha, oto rasha ba'otasha. He slept with her 7 times. It never says in the pasuk they actually have relations, but they darshan it. They had 7 acts of intercourse. Shneimar ben raglei karan afal shachav. They don't quote the whole pasuk, but there's 7 verbs there. Okay, between her legs he bowed, fell, lied. Okay, and then it continues that. This is in the Shirat Dvorah, in the song that Dvorah sings after. Okay, so there you see there's 7 verbs. That's the 7 times. But wait a minute, didn't she benefit from the sin by enjoying sexual relations? So I'm Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai afilu tovatan shel reshaim ra'ah etzal tzadikim. And this, I think, is something we can all relate to. I mean, hopefully not from personal experience, but even if a rasha is trying to do something that's supposed to, let's say, benefit the woman having sex with him, right? It's bad for tzaddikim. It's not pleasurable for her. In other words, right? Anyone, God forbid, who was raped, or right here she wasn't raped, but she did it for the sake of this mitzvah. It wasn't an act of pleasure for her at all. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Lo'olam ya'asok adam b'torah v'mitzvot afilu shel. And what's bothering them, let me just go back for a minute, is that if she did this sin lishma and it's viewed as a positive thing, how could it be a positive thing when she actually benefited from the sin, like the enjoyment? She got enjoyment out of the sin. So they just assume she didn't enjoy herself, which makes a lot of sense. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Lo'olam ya'asok adam b'torah v'mitzvot afilu shelo lishma sh'mitoch shelo lishma ba lishma. That's what we said before. Now quoting it again. You should always do Torah and mitzvot, even not for the right reasons, because even if you do it for the wrong reasons, or not for the right reasons, you'll come to ultimately do it for the right reasons. How do we know this? Very strange proof we're going to bring. Schar ba'im u'shnayim korbanot she'ikriv Balak harasha. If you remember, Balak brings 42 korbanot because Bilam tells him, if you want me to get prophecy, you want me to curse the Jewish people, in order to do that, you have to bring sacrifices to God. So he does it. And because of that, even though it was a mitzvah shelo lishma, not for the right reasons, obviously, but zachavi etztami menu Ruth. And Ruth came from him. How do we know this? Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Chanina, Ruth bat beno shel Eglon ben beno shel Balak melech Moab. Okay, Balak was the grandfather of Eglon, and Eglon was the grandfather of Ruth. Some people say there's more generations there, but what it means is basically it was a direct descendant of Balak. Ruth was a direct descendant of Balak. That was his reward. Okay, last thing for today. I'm Rabbi Chia bar Abba, I'm Rabbi Yochanan, minayin she'en HaKadosh Baruch Hu mekapech afilu schar sicha na'ah. You know that God rewards even for a nice conversation, like using the proper words, mehacha. This is all about, carefully choosing your words. De'ilu b'chidra. Okay, we're now back to the two daughters of Lot. The older one, Dekarya Moav, she called her son Moav. Amalei Rachmana Lamosha, Al Tatzer Moav, Al Titkar Ba Milchama. Notice what's Moav, Me'av, from my father. That was not a nice thing to say. And because of that, God told Moshe, don't fight with Moav. Al Titkar Ba Milchama. Don't start up a war with them. Milchama udelo, Aval Hatziur Tzarinu. You don't Litkar Ba Milchama, but you can bother them otherwise, just don't get to the extent of war. And then we're going to see tomorrow what the Tzira said, and how she said a word that was much more modest. Wasn't my father's son, that I got pregnant from my father, and Ammon was punished less, and we're going to see that all in the words tomorrow. Okay, finished our long daf. We're now going to just do a quick review. So we had all these drashot about the king and the nasi. In what ways are they different? In what ways? The king and the Kohen Gadol. In what ways are the same? In what ways are they different? What points in their reign do they, or in their rulership, do they have to bring this unique korban and whatnot? Where do we get all that from the psukim? Why not from the Kaf HaChomers, or why does the Kaf HaChomer teach otherwise, etc.? Why do we need a drasha? We had a whole bunch of things like that. We had a lot of drashot on Asher Nasi Achtal, all sorts of different drashot, and that got us on all sorts of tangents, including Lot and his daughters, and this ending that we ended with about mitzvah, doing a mitzvah shelo lishma, or an avera lishma, and from that we got into Yael, and all sorts of other interesting things. With that, we finished for today. Wishing everyone a good day.